fall series that has been, again, just a wonderful success. I so much thank everyone for being here today and a number of people supporting the museum with their attendance throughout the fall. So thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it here. And I do want to, again, put a spotlight of recognition and thanks to several people here. Again, museum people that are here, Debbie Minnow Ritchie and Randy Taylor. Just really cornerstones of what goes on here. And I really appreciate the friendship, and it's a great spot here to be here and try to keep this thing alive. Of course, again, our young museum director, Olivia Dion, there she is back there again. Yes. It is such a joy to have a young person with a young attitude and a capable young person with knowledge of this electronic world that we all find ourselves living through, and somebody who can navigate that and help me. So again, just great. Really want to compliment her on her work here. I do want to point out, yes, it's December. We all know that Christmas season, another of them, has come right into our lap. And we do have, good morning, have some new things here that we would encourage people to think about for maybe Christmas presents.
No, that's okay.
These are still smoking from coming off the press last night. Our new museum calendar for 2024, and we featured historic barns right here from our Chico area. The calendar, of course, every page has got a picture of a barn. And so again, we like this. They're right here. They're for sale today. We got a new batch of what are always popular here, where Chico, where the nuts come from, shirts and sweatshirts right here. And of course, we've got a great inventory of books here, and including another title that, again, it's still warm. It's been off the press for a few days, but still just published right about BIDWELL Park. And we'll quickly get to that. Yes, I do. So I'm going to hold this up and see what happens here. Yeah, sure, come on. So again, just a little Christmas season blab from me. This morning, it was just getting light outside. My precious granddaughter right over here, Madison, we call her Maddie, look at her. Talk about young, talk about innocent. And she's heading into, of course, the Christmas season. And so we're there this morning here thinking of how to, thank you for coming up, and you can do what you want now. Okay, how do we take up a little time here this morning before we get Grandma out of bed and get ready to come down here? The fire is going there, put another log in there. Yeah, I'll read a book. So I knew the book I wanted, this one right here, which is one of my all-time favorite books, Dr. Seuss' How the Grinch Stole Christmas. So there was a time, it seems like long, long ago, but not really, for me when I was a daycare provider. My wife and I spent 30 years there working hand in hand every day for long days, running a little state licensed daycare right here in Chico, and that's how we made our money. And one of my real strengths was reading books. I've read thousands and thousands of books. I could get 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 kids to gather around on the couch and sit on my lap and keep them contained and keep them focused on a book and not raging out of control. And so it's something I turn to constantly. And so reading this book again this morning here was just such a, it brought back all of that and brought back my own position to Christmas throughout my adult life. Where long ago, I'm going to say 50 years ago when I was a young man and I really turned away from Christmas because I thought it was an excessive consumption of stuff. And so I did really step away and never really did all of the gift buying and wanting to get things and all of that. But again, it was beautiful to read this book again this morning. I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but the terrible Grinch that wants to steal Christmas because he doesn't like the way it's happy and the gifts and the singing and the feasting. And again, one of the great pictures here in this book is this one here, when the Grinch, where is, I want to show you, because again, there it is. Look at that beautiful picture. Then he got an idea, an awful idea. The Grinch got a wonderful, awful idea. I love that from Dr. Seuss. And again, it was just enjoyable to read it and remember, and two things kind of came to mind there. One, come on, David, lighten up. And get with the program and recognize what a beautiful and precious thing this whole Christmas season is for all of us. To find ourselves here in a peaceful place. It's warm. We got food. What a wonderful moment. And so I want to hold on to that. And just put a spotlight on that. How lucky we are. And so I think really that is enough blabbery. But again, glad to see you all here. And we're going to turn now to, again, one of my very favorite things in all the world, BIDWELL Park. And we're going to hear from Paul Belz and his new book, again, that's just come out. Paul was born in Pennsylvania, grew up there at least, came to California in the 1970s, the early 70s, and has been here since. Has done a number of things throughout his adult life, including teaching and writing articles and essays that he's had published, and he does have a new little book of
I didn't bring it, but I'll mention it.
A nice little book on kind of a poetry book. And I think after years of working on this, and I was fortunate enough to have a small hand in his research on this, but I know how much he labored over this and how long it took to finally have this in hand. And so it's a great story, and I hope you'll think about purchasing one this morning. Again, I have thought for so long that BIDWELL Park is just about the best thing that Chico has going for it. And I think for a number of reasons, BIDWELL Park has had a distinction and a place in the Chico community that is a little different than most of the parks that maybe we would visit and see around the United States. Today, it's nothing to go to a community and hear, oh yeah, we got a park. Yeah, it's 300 acres. Yeah, there's playgrounds and there's ball fields and stuff. We got it covered. But the story of BIDWELL Park is something a little different. And it came out of a different time, and it always has remained here in Chico as something a little different than a park for ball fields and picnic tables and playgrounds. The park was established as a tribute to the natural world, which really has always been really the center of me here, right here. You might see me and think, yeah, he's an historian. No, I'm not. I don't do any research. I'm not really a historian. I do really love the natural world around us. That's where I take my strength and my spirit. And the park was such an expression of that. And the struggle that's gone on in this community over what to do with that BIDWELL Park. Whether we make it into ball fields or whether we let the Valley Oak trees have their space. So again, it's a great story. It came out of a time when Americans were still focused on conquering the world around them. And the thought of setting some landscape that hadn't been conquered yet, set it aside as an expression of something powerful that we don't really have a definition for. So again, I am so glad to see this book come to its conclusion, get published, and we're going to hear from Paul about it.
Okay, thank you. Well, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thanks, Dave. And you were more than a small part in this, I'll have to say. And a lot of people were. And I will mention, well, in particular, the one person I really want to mention is the late Wes Dempsey, who was totally supportive, gave me a lot of help and information, and the book is dedicated to Wes. And I wish you could be here with us, Wes, but okay, that's how it is. Wes was, of course, was a very beloved biologist and a big advocate for the park and a lot of other things. So I'll just quickly follow up on Dave. Yeah, I moved to Chico from Oakland about 7 years ago. I have been a science and nature educator for quite a number of years. I'm also a writer. I've had a number of articles and poems published. This is actually my second published book. The first one, which Dave mentioned, is called Sometimes the Soul Needs Chocolate. Pandemic goes. So if you want to hear more about that, ask me at some point. I ran out in a hurry and didn't bring any, but I can always talk about it. So I've been here for 7 years, and I've been an avid park hiker and explorer the whole time. About 6 years ago, I was writing an article for a environmental travel website that I used to write for, and I did an article on the park, and I interviewed someone who said, would you consider writing a book? And I said, well, sure. And I very naively thought I could do it in 1 year. Here I am. Took a lot of work and a lot of research, but it's right there in front of you. And here's why we think this is important. The park, like Dave said, is incredibly unique. 3,670 acres as the last count I saw, and it goes from developed to semi-wild. I'll go over a lot of this. And it has sports, it has swimming, it has bicycling, it has a playground, one big playground, which I'll show a photo of, and it has wild areas, semi-wild areas, which I will talk about the ecology in a little bit. And a lot of us really feel that the park has not gotten the attention that it needs and deserves in quite a while. And if we're going to really keep working on funding and upkeep and maintaining, it needs to become more of a focus like it used to be at one time. There used to be articles and forums and everything else about it. Now the information that's put out is pretty small, so I'm trying to rectify that, trying to get back to it. Okay, I'll say just a couple words about this particular book. It took a lot of research. There's very little organized research on Bidwell Park. There are, of course, 3 books by Roger Lederer and Carol Barr on the birds and the wildflowers and the trees. And there is another older book on the natural history, but nothing really in one place other than that. So I had to go through all kinds of articles, websites, parts of books, master's theses, a lot of government documents, particularly the Park and Playground Commission minutes, which were sometimes boring as could be and other times practically Shakespearean drama, like the last scene in Hamlet or something. And a lot of interviews. I interviewed a lot of people with, particularly Wes, and Dave shows up quite a bit, a lot of other people, and some of my own personal thoughts. So it's an attempt to bring everything together in one place. And I really want to stress, this is not a comprehensive book on the park. I could have spent a lot more years and a lot more time and energy on it if I wanted to cover everything. It is an overview. And written for a general audience. And so there were things that I included and things I thought were maybe not appropriate for a book like that, but you can find them. And I'm hoping there will be more discussion about this. And let's get started. So the park, 3,670, I believe, acres, stretches from downtown up towards the Cascade foothills, where it connects with Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve, which is another very fine place. And of course, people think about 3 basic sections to the park. It goes from pretty developed in Lower Park. Here, of course, is Sycamore Pool in 1 mile recreation area. A lot of great picnic areas around here too, and a lot of activities take place here. There are some really nice trails not far from that. This is a Lower Park trail, maybe 500 feet from Sycamore Pool. And of course, sports field, a lot of other activities happen here, sports, but different gatherings and sometimes festivals have happened here. And of course, there you go, Caper Acres. You have to be 13 or younger, or being accompanying somebody who's 13 or younger, and that doesn't mean you can say I feel like a 13-year-old. It doesn't work that way. So that's a pretty developed Lower Park. Middle Park is kind of a transition area, less developed than Lower Park, but also fairly developed. 5 Mile, of course, a great place for picnics. I've been to a number of them. And then beyond that, of course, Upper Park, which you could walk for miles here and feel like you were miles from civilization. This is, of course, Iron Canyon. And that's part of the Tuscan, not the Tuscan, the Lovejoy Basalt Formation, which I'll talk about a little in a couple of minutes. So pretty big and diverse place, like Dave was saying. Okay, I'm going to give you a bit of very, very basic natural history and geology. People talk very simply, this is simple and in a nutshell, about there being basically 3 geological layers. This is a little piece of the Chico Formation. And 65 to 75 million years ago, there was an inland sea here, which was finally blocked from the Pacific by the development and rise of the coastal range. And then it dried up, but it deposited huge amounts of sandstone and shale, and you can find fossils. This I actually took up in Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve. You can find lots of places with fossils there, but I'm told that there are some in Upper Park too. I've never found them, but maybe I'll do a search. So this is the bedrock that underlies a whole lot of our region, actually. Next comes the Lovejoy basalt. The big black boulders you're seeing are crystalline basalt from a series of volcanic eruptions in the Cascades roughly 18 million years ago. And they cover a whole lot of our region. Of course, some of the more famous formations are Black Butte and Table Mountain. Those are both Lovejoy basalt formations. Most recent, which covers a lot of both of these other formations, consider the top layer, is the Tuscan Formation. 7 million years ago and more recent, there was a series of mud flows. There was snow on the slopes of some of the Cascades, and hot water coming through vents melted the snow. And the water carried an immense amount of mud and other materials down. The interesting thing, on the bottom layer, if you look closely, there are round stones there, which means stream bed deposit. The top layer is the mud flow. So it was a series, actually, of streams and mud flow and streams and mud flow and streams and mud flow, building up. These are some Tuscan cliffs, again in Upper Park. That's Iron Canyon again. And of course, one of the most famous and well-known parts of the Tuscan Formation, there it is, monkey face. And I don't know if you can see the monkey's face. I sometimes can. It depends on how the light's hitting it. Okay, and of course, maybe the dominant feature, well, the most noticeable in certain ways, is Big Chico Creek. Originates at 6,000 feet on Colby Mountain, and it follows a route of 45 miles to the Sacramento River. And here it's coming down pretty steeply. This is Upper Park, somewhere around Bear Hole. But at a certain point around Middle Park, it does flatten out, forms the floodplain. You can see why they call it a floodplain. This was maybe a year or so ago after some of the heavy rain. And of course, then it flows out to the Sacramento River. So, little bit about, I'll do some basic botany and zoology. So, there are a number of types of ecosystems in the park, especially Upper Park. And grasslands are a pretty prominent one. The interesting thing is most of these grasses are introduced. And they wound up here during and after European settlement. The seeds were actually in the digestive systems of some cattle. But if you look around carefully, you can find native bunch grasses such as deer grass and purple needle grass. It's there. If you know where to look and recognize it, you can certainly find it. And you're also seeing here the blue oaks, very adapted to living up on the Tuscan cliffs, which it's very, very dry up there, but they can sprout in cracks in rocks. And they can the roots can absorb enough water to survive through the summer. If they get too much water, they can die. But they're called blue oaks because there's kind of a blue waxy cover to the leaves that holds water in during really hot temperatures. And there are a bunch of lupins around that too. I'll show lupins again later. We can talk a lot about all the trees in the park. I'll just mention a couple more. You can see here gray pines or foothill pines, which you find mostly in the higher areas, also very drought adapted. They're up on the ridge tops a lot. And they have very thick coats of wax on their needles so they don't lose water. And the needles are also kind of sparse. So you're not losing a lot of water from one area. And one of the things I find interesting about these is if you go up into snow country, the pines are triangular. So when it snows, they will actually shed the snow. These guys are not triangular, so they're not adapted to living in higher educations. Another ecosystem is called riparian or stream or riverside. This is Yahi Trail, of course. And one of the prominent trees there is the valley oak. These cannot survive up on the dry cliffs. They need to be where there's about 6 feet of moist soil, and they have a taproot that will dig down into the deep soil and all the way to the water table. They have to reach it if they're going to survive. And they're bigger. They will grow to a bigger size than the blue oaks or others we see around here. And Yahi Trail area, again, lots of wildflowers. I'd have to look more closely. I believe those are goldfields, prominent springtime flower. But I have to be able to get a closer look. This is a real common plant in the riparian era. It's western redbud. And one thing that's very cool about this is it's actually a member of the pea family. So it'll absorb nitrogen from the atmosphere and deposit it in the soil. Very good for other plants. Same with lupins. You can find different species of lupins in different parts of the park, both by the creek and higher elevations. And if we do get good rain this year, which I'm still hoping for, you'll see lots of wild fungi. I've started seeing some. You can probably see why these are called turkey tails. So, little bit about animals. There they are. Wes Dempsey told me these are the most common animal in the park. Wacka wacka. Acorn woodpeckers will pound acorns into trees in parallel lines to protect them from other critters that might want to eat them. They'll also go after flying insects and they'll eat sap. And they will eat both the acorn and any grubs they find inside. And if you spend much time in the park, you'll see them having arguments with squirrels. And they're also a little unusual among woodpeckers. Most, not all, but most woodpeckers are solitary nesters. These guys nest in colonies. That's why you'll often see them. This is called a granary tree, where they have put the acorns and they will guard it together. Pipevine swallowtails, very common in spring and summer. And their larvae will eat the leaves from pipevine, which has toxins, making it something that most creatures can't eat. These guys have adapted to eating them. The orange spots tell birds, don't eat me or you're going to throw up. The larvae, caterpillars, also have the orange spots. Red-shouldered hawk, very common. Pew, pew, pew. A couple of mergansers, fishing ducks. Lots of insects. There's a dragonfly for you. And we actually ran into this guy taking a little break on the golf course. There are other large animals that do come through. There was, a few years ago, there was a mountain lion who was denning and raising her kittens near 5 Mile. People blocked that off so nobody would run into her. And when she was done, she went on her way, and so did the kittens. Bears will come down out of Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve sometimes. They're more common up there, but when the manzanitas and other shrubs are producing berries, they will come. All right, I'll say, we know who this is. A little human history. Before I talk about these guys, I just want to mention, yes, the Machupta Maidu have been here for ages, and they are the original land stewards. And they're certainly still around promoting things like traditional ecological wisdom. And after a lot of discussion, we concluded that in a book like this, we really could not do their history and culture justice. So what we decided, I have some basic facts, but we also have a appendix that will take you to a whole lot of articles and books and a whole lot of information about the Maidu. And also in the bibliography, you can find works like people like Henry Asbill, the tribal elder, who was a very prominent thinker. So we just felt that that would be a better way of presenting their story than trying to summarize it for this. And it would be much too easy to misrepresent them. But you can go there and find a whole lot more information. So, and this is not really a book about the Bidwells, but they're part of the story. And we could spend all day talking about the Bidwells. I'll just say a few things in relationship to the park. John, of course, grew up very poor in New York. And he moved to Missouri, where he became both a teacher and he tried to be a farmer. One day he went to St. Louis to buy some school supplies. And when he came back, there was a squatter on his land. Since John was not 21, he couldn't establish title, so he joined an overland troop coming to California. And when he got here, pretty undeveloped place. I refer to one of his writings where he says there were no roads, no real currency, no lawyers. Must have been quite a place. He went to work for John Sutter. He was both a bookkeeper and land manager for him. At a certain point, he had borrowed, I believe, some horses which vanished. He came looking for them in Butte County and fell in love with the area and decided he wanted to have some land here. So he did really make it. He became pretty wealthy during the gold rush. He had a place called BIDWELL Bar where he did mining and also offered supplies to miners, and he bought his land here, became his ranch. And a couple of things about his thoughts about, I should also say he was very politically involved. He was in the California State Senate. He also did a term in Congress. While he was there, he met Annie Ellicott Kennedy, whose family was very prominent. John fell completely in love with her, and then she came around to really wanting to be with him too. And they were married. She came here in 1868, and they worked on the farm and the ranch. They had cattle, sheep, raised things like wheat, fruit. For a while, John was raising grapes for wine, but Annie was a prohibitionist and talked him out of it. And they both had a deep love of wildness. They were both friends of John Muir's. But BIDWELL also felt that agriculture could improve on nature and turn California into a real Garden of Eden. So he was real big on technology, irrigation, bringing in a lot of plants from other areas to see if they would survive here. But again, they both had a love of the land. They kept part of the land wild. They call it Vallombrosa, after a place that's mentioned in Paradise Lost. And they shared it with guests from John Muir to Rutherford Hayes, all kinds of people. After John died, Annie was friends with Susan B. Anthony. And they agreed at a certain point they would donate their wilder land to the city as a park. So John died in 1900, and in 1905, Annie came up with a deed which granted Vallombrosa to the city. And she put out certain stipulations. One was two very important things, statements that she made. One was that the park should belong to everyone in Chico. And the other one was that she charged the city with preserving the stream and the animals and the plant life. And different people, as we'll see, picked up on, some people picked on one statement, some people picked up on the other, and that led to some conflicts, which we will get into shortly. So other things, she said there could be ranching if it didn't disturb people enjoying the park. There was a flume that Pacific Lumber had for lumber to come out of the mountains, that was allowed to stay for a while. She was a strict Presbyterian, no organized picnics on Sundays, no park picnics organized by organizations, and she said there should never be the manufacture or sale of alcohol in the park, and that will come up a little later too. All right, so there was a big community celebration on the grounds of the mansion, and she granted the Vallombrosa to the city. Originally, it was a large piece of land up around Iron Canyon and a place called Devil's Kitchen and some other spots. Then there were some other places that were added as time went on. She added, I think, another 300 acres later in her life in the far northern eastern section. Then at one point, a group of 100 citizens paid $10 each to add 30-something acres around what's now Cedar Grove. This is World of Trees, and what happened here was there was a forestry station where people did experiments with different plants to see which would survive in this area. John Bidwell had some connections with that. So you can walk down the trail and see all kinds of trees. Some are from our area, some are not. These are cork oaks from England. Later on, they added some land that had been a ranch that belonged to one of Annie's nephews. And in 1995, we had the last addition of a large chunk of land in between Route 32 and Big Chico Creek. We're looking down on Iron Canyon here from that area. This is probably the least developed part of the park, and a very big piece of land. Okay, Annie died in 1918. The city set up the Bidwell Park and Playground Commission to be an advisory committee for City Council about the park. There's been an ongoing debate about whether it should have enforcement powers or remain just an advisory board, and I think those issues will come up again. A lot of opinions. Originally, it just did a lot of pure administrative stuff. It would talk to people who wanted to use or rent or use parts of the park for different reasons, or maintaining facilities. Establishing speed limits on the road was a big one. And they really looked out for the World of Trees and for the hooker oak, which I will get into in a little while. And one of the most interesting things was at a certain point, people decided that anyone who was fully clothed swimming at Sycamore Pool would absorb too much water and sink, and lifeguards couldn't save them. So the commission decided nobody could swim fully clothed at 1 mile. So this, a lot of, again, very basic administrative things. Around the 1970s, of course, and beyond is when there was a lot more environmental consciousness that rose, and that led to all kinds of things, which we'll touch on. Before that, there were other things that came up that showed some environmental consciousness. Like at a certain point, some people wanted to establish a landing strip for airplanes. That one didn't fly, pun intended. People wanted there to be a car wash which would flow into the creek. The craziest was after World War II, there was a proposal to have a radar-based bombing range in the park, which fortunately crashed. But let's get into some of the others. And again, this is an overview. There are a whole lot more issues, a lot of which I go into in the book, but I'll give you some big ones. This was actually the 1950s. California and Chico were growing, and people decided there was a need for a major highway going through town. Route 99, of course, had gone through downtown, but people decided it needed to come more away from downtown. The state, for purely engineering regions, wanted it to be by Sheridan Avenue. But there was disagreement from Mayor Ted Merriam and City Council and the Butte County Board of Supervisors. Their position was that it should be out by Forest Avenue, which was more on the edge of town in those days, believe it or not. And they thought, their reasoning was, well, one thing, at the time they thought that it would split the city in two, it would cross some routes to school and some neighborhoods, and they really had a huge concern about the impact it would have on 1 Mile and Sycamore Pool. Battle royale in the 50s. It went on, if you can believe it. Of course, Sheridan Avenue finally won. That's where it is. Long story. And that's where it is. And there's a certain consensus that that's the best place for it, because farther out it would disrupt wildlife habitat a whole lot more. But I don't think anyone's ever studied its impact. It would be nice if somebody did. Here, somebody, at a certain point, someone put some murals on the pillars, which is kind of nice. I haven't heard about ringtails in the park, but I guess they must be here. Okay, Upper Park Road leading into Upper Park has been an ongoing controversy from its inception, and it still is. There are people who say that cars should have access all the way up to the end into the wilder part of the park. Other people say it becomes steep, and if cars go up there, they'll cause a lot of erosion, and a lot of silt will flow down into the creek, damaging fish habitat and just causing a big mess. And also cars up there will be disrupting a lot of wildlife. That's an ongoing thing. Right now, it's closed to car traffic on Sundays and Mondays, and cars do not go past Salmon Hole. But there's ongoing discussions. Will it go farther? And there has been some work on the park on the road lower down, where they've built some culverts under it so water could flow underneath the road and avoid picking up silt and stuff that would flow into the creek. But there have been discussions about that too. Keep an eye on it. You'll hear about it as time goes on. The gate is closed again on Sundays and Mondays to cars. And I'll also mention, while we are here, at a certain point, there were people who drove motorcycles and ORVs in the hills in Upper Park. Caused a lot of damage, a lot of erosion, and a whole lot of the community was united on trying to stop this. A lot of, again, big discussions and commission meetings, and there were even some ORV drivers, the 4x4s, who tried to, they would build blockades on some of the ORV roads so other people couldn't use them. And finally there were fines and everything else, and that ended. Thank you. Okay, talking about cars. This is, of course, is South Park Drive. North Park Drive is on the other side of the creek, both in pretty much in Lower Middle Park. And Annie wanted no cars in the park for various reasons. But obviously there are roads and cars. At a certain point, like the 80s, there was a lot of partying going along here. And people would actually have drag races down these roads. And Wes Dempsey told me that if we went into certain parts of the park, which we never got around to, he could show me oaks where cars had smashed into them during drag races. So this was another big fight in the commission and everywhere else, where people wanted to limit cars. They wanted some people didn't want cars in the park at all. Others wanted both roads to be one way, which they are now. And a lot of discussion and arguing about that. Ultimately, what happened is a lot of families said we need to get our kids up to swimming areas, and the only way is to drive. And a lot of people with disabilities also said we need access to some of the farther parts of the park, and we can only do that through driving. So That was a very big one. There was something of a compromise. Well, yeah, there was a compromise where at this point the times when cars can go on the roads are limited. There's a speed limit. Parking is limited. And when you go up around Middle Park, there are picnic areas that are close to city streets that are easier for people with disabilities to get to. So, again, I think this will be an ongoing issue. We'll watch where it goes. But you can see how close it is to the creek. Aha, here we go. Horseshoe Lake. How many people think Horseshoe Lake's always been there? Knowledgeable group. Horseshoe Lake. In 1937, the WPA built a dam up by Salmon Hole to channel water here as a reservoir for the golf course. And that lasted for about 10 years. And then the golf course started getting water from the creek. And after that, they had pretty much said they don't need this anymore. All kinds of things happened here. One of which was there were water skiing festivals. Don't ask me. There was also water skiing on 1 mile for that matter. And again, don't ask me how any of this worked. So there was that. There were people, they wanted to fly model airplanes around this area. There was at one point a go-kart track up on these hills, which pretty much ended after there were some fairly serious accidents. It wasn't one that was official. It was just put in there, but it ended. The big issue around Horseshoe Lake, of course, was the outdoor shooting ranges. And they were established originally for the police and the National Guard. At a certain point, some of the gun clubs had more access. And again, this turned into a really big issue with the commission and elsewhere around the 1980s or so, when people were starting to go and hike more in Upper Park at that point. A lot of people had avoided it for a while, but now it was becoming more popular. There were hikers, people worried about them being hit by bullets. There was also a lot of concern about pollution from shells and everything else. Finally, the outdoor shooting range and an archery range were moved to other places outside of the park. There is, of course, still the indoor shooting range, which people can visit. So the park, the lake at this point, there's a trail that goes around and people walk their dogs. A lot of birds come. We've seen bald eagles there. Not in a while. There was also a pair of snow geese there until pretty recently, which was interesting. They seem to have moved on. I'm not quite sure what that's all about, but they know what they're doing. And one of my favorite places, and a lot of people don't like this, but I do, the Community Observatory. Some people think it's an eyesore, but astronomy is nature studies, and you also often find these in parks. And they have a lot of really great programs. They haven't for a while. My understanding is they're repairing telescopes and stuff. And the other thing that's happened here is hooked on fishing, not drugs. I don't think that's happened since COVID. Fishing program for kids. But pretty interesting place to hike. Okay. The golf course was in 1919. A group of people, citizens, approached the commission and said, can we build a golf course up there? And they said, oh, sure. From my reading of the commission minutes, for a very, very long time, there was a pretty cooperative and benign relationship between the golf course and the Park and Playgrounds Commission and City Council. The big controversy was around the sale of alcohol, beer, in the clubhouse, which again, around the 80s and beyond, was a very big controversy. Golfers said that if they could sell beer like other golf courses could, they could be self-sustaining. And other people said, well, It's going to cause a lot more traffic into Upper Park. Kids are going to be exposed to people who have been drinking heavily. And this went on and on and on and on, which I go into some detail about. Finally, of course, the city did agree for alcohol to be sold. It's controlled, maybe more so than in other parts of the park. But the other big issue, around the 1980s, a lot of golfers said the golf course was in very bad shape and they needed some support for repairs. The big thing was, they said the driving ranges were so crowded that people could be hit by golf balls. So there was a move to expand the golf course. And the proposal was for it to expand to Horseshoe Lake, around Horseshoe Lake, which is right across the road from it. And at first, the city and a lot of the commission went along with this idea, but then there wound up being concerns like, all kinds of things. The impact of pesticides on Horseshoe Lake and traffic. And there was a acorn woodpecker granary. A lot of the arguments were centered around whether that should be moved or not. Finally, of course, the road was realigned and the golf course did expand to its present size. Another thing, okay, this is on the most recent part of the park that was acquired in '95. And there was originally an unofficial disc golf course. This was organized, Peregrine Point was organized to be more under control. There's been discussions about the impacts of disc golf on native plants and on people kicking up loose dirt that could flow down off the hillsides, and some concern about discs hitting the oaks up there. And there are peregrine falcons that have nests up there, but people watching closely saying this doesn't really seem to impact on their behavior or their situation. So the city and the group called Chico Outsiders are working to keep a close watch on things, and a certain number of park advocates have really kept an eye on the situation too. You'll hear more about this, I'm sure. One of the big issues, introduced plants. Some of them come in from people's yards. There are more types and higher numbers in Lower Park. This is, of course, English ivy. It'll climb up into the higher parts of the tree, block photosynthesis, so the tree will have trouble surviving. There's a group I'll mention a little later that's dedicated to cutting the ivy off of the trees. It's called, I'll think of it later. The Ivy League, that's what it is. All right, and what's this? Star thistle. It's all over. It's real common in Upper Park, nasty. It will burn, take over habitat. And there are a couple of ways of dealing with it. This was a prescribed burn, the area of a prescribed burn a few years ago. This is, of course, a technique that indigenous people all over the world have used to clear land for different reasons. And it's being more and more used to get rid of invasive species and to lower the fuel load to prevent fires. Now, this was a few years ago. There have been several others since then. And the other way to get rid of introduced plants that's real popular among most people. And I saw them earlier this fall. I don't know where they are right now, but they'll be back. Okay. Oh, not yet. We'll get there in a minute. Just want to say a couple other things. The big issue, of course, is funding for the park, for upkeep and restoration and all of the buildings and everything else. It's been a low priority. And one of the reasons why we want to raise awareness is so we know that City Council knows that there are people who want the park to be funded very well. And one other issue, there are other more recent issues. The one that I will mention is that there have been people going up Yahi Trail and BIDWELL Trail with clippers and cutting down small trees, cutting some of the shrubs. No, no. I don't know if you ever run into them, tell them they are not friends of the park and they need to stop this. There are people, I think they do this at night. There are people who are watching out for them. So good luck to the people watching out for them.
Why aren't they doing it?
I have no idea. Nobody knows who they are or why they're doing any of this. But it's not good. I don't know, Dave, later maybe you can say more about that if you've heard more, but we'll get into a discussion. Okay, onward, one of the most unusual uses of the park. 1937, they thought, Warner Brothers thought that the park looked like Sherwood Forest, so outdoor parts of the Adventures of Robin Hood were filmed around 1 mile. Here they are. It brought a lot of excitement and a lot of money into Chico at the time, and from what I've read, Errol Flynn was a true character. And one of the stories I read was he and his wife, they had been estranged and just gotten back together, but they had an argument in a restaurant and she threw a shoe at him. So, pardon? So this is a big thing that happened. It was a lot of excitement. No one has really thought about the impact on the park. In fact, they didn't want the leaves to change colors in autumn, so they actually dyed some of them green. It would be, I don't know if, nobody was thinking about this kind of thing in those days, or very few people anyway. So quite a story, and what do we have here? The interesting thing, the Hooker Oak is fascinating because a lot of its story really does reflect on a lot of people's attitudes towards the park and nature around us. Of course, it was well loved by the Bidwells, named after Sir Joseph Hooker, a botanist. People thought for a long, long time that it was over 1,000 years old. And people would come out here for celebrations, weddings, picnics, all kinds of community events. And it was weakening by the 1970s. It fell over in a windstorm. One thing that happened was people figured out was that it was two saplings that had fused together. But the community's reaction, which I'd go into, it was really very interesting. Showed a lot of different attitudes. One guy came out apparently and wanted to gather a lot of it for firewood, but he was stopped from doing that. Other people, there was a procession, I guess, for 2 days, procession of mourning for the Hooker Oak. And it was in the commission and everywhere else, there were big debates. What do we do with the Hooker Oak? Some people wanted it to stay where it was and just decay naturally. Others said, let's send parts of it to universities for study. Other people said it can be used for furniture and a gavel for city council. That happened to a certain point. There were people who said, oh, let's cut it up into blocks which we can sell to fund the park, like pet blocks, like pet rocks. What happened ultimately was it was cut into boards by a lumberyard in Oroville. And the city got 3/4 of the boards, the lumberyard kept the rest. But since then, the lumberyard has given all of theirs to the city. And my understanding, somebody may know more about this, is that they were well preserved and they're still sitting in a warehouse somewhere. Maybe there's more to find out about that. This is where the Hooker Oak was. This is actually carved land now, Chico Area Recreation District land. But it was here. Oh, the stump actually caught fire and burned at a certain point too. But I'm going to just quickly mention some of the these are some of the defining issues that have made the place what it is. I'm going to really go into some of the very positive things happening. One is there's a group called PALS, Partners, Ambassadors, Leaders and Stewards, connected with the city. And I'm part of that. We go out, we do cleanups, we do remove invasive vegetations. People will go as ambassadors to tell people about regulations and where things are in the park. That's a city program. And every year in the autumn, Butte Environmental Council has a greenways and waterways cleanup that meets right around here. People go into the park and all over town to different waterways and clean up. And it's really a pretty cool, and you wouldn't believe what we found, but I don't think I need to go there. And other couple things. Oh, not yet. Not just yet. Oh, no. All right. Well, I'll just mention a couple other things and go to that. There's a group called the Stream Team. I've also done this, does water quality monitoring where we look for pH and dissolved oxygen and other factors, what's living there. And I should have mentioned this. People have put a number of illegal trails in different parts of the park. Chico Velo, which also does bike advocacy, has done trail repair and work to close down some of the illegal ones, which is a good reason, a good idea for various reasons. And yeah, the Ivy League goes out and removes ivy that could harm oaks. There are educational programs. The Chico Creek Nature Center has camps and other things. There are a couple of other programs. There's one called Happy Acres Forest School for preschoolers. They do a lot of exploration. There's one called Earthbound Skills for slightly older kids, and older kids. They do exploration too, but they learn a lot of nature-based skills. And I've talked to both of them in this meadow by 5 Mile, but I've seen Earthbound Skills in other places too. Okay, oh, I should have mentioned the Stream Team there, water coming down into Sycamore Pool. Okay, so the question is, I don't think I need to tell anybody here that the world is in a state of chaos. So is any of this important? Some people would say no. I say it absolutely is. One of the reasons is there's a lot of consensus that the park saved a lot of people's sanity during the pandemic, including mine. And it's well known how important outdoor activities are, whether it's sports, bicycling, swimming, hiking. And there is I can say as an environmental educator, there is a tremendous body of research about how healthy and important exposure to nature is for children. All kinds of benefits, massive amounts of benefits. And it's just very important to have a connection with the history and the land around you. It's a very, very big issue. I mean, without a place like this, people can lose touch with the place where they live. And of course, we're not the only creatures living here. They have homes too, and where else would you see something like that? Yeah. All right. So I've been yammering up here for a while. Let's see what other people have to say. Yes?
Paul,
Uh-huh.
first a comment then a question. I think I met you before. We were in the same writing class.
Oh, yeah.
And I mentioned at that time that it was my great-grandfather, William Robbie, who accepted the deed from Annie BIDWELL in 1905. And then he took my identical twin grandmothers for a walk through the park and made that comment about now the city of Chico people have their park, now they need a road to see their park. You made that comment about the road discussion began in 1990, like the year after Annie BIDWELL died.
Yes.
And he was no longer the mayor, he became the mayor after that.
Right.
And all that. So that was kind of catching my ear, like when did that road go in?
Yeah, yeah.
And it was his son who raised those big old pillars, my great uncle, in the entrance to the south side of the park.
Sure. Okay, yeah, thanks for mentioning that.
But my real question
Yeah.
was, I ride my bike into the park and there's that olive orchard or old retired olive orchard to the south side of Upper Park. When you first go off Centennial, up on that park. That's pretty cool, but you didn't mention it. And why is that there?
I think it's a pretty good guess that it's remnants of John Bidwell's work, as he did bring in, and olives are not a native species to this area. So I would guess that either Bidwell did, or possibly somebody connected with the State Forestry Board, but I think it was probably Bidwell brought those in. Okay. Yes.
A little off topic, this is wonderful talk, but just very recently, in the last week, I saw that the pageant is going to be airing Robin Hood in the coming days or weeks. It's on there coming.
Oh, okay. Well, you can go and say, I know this place. Okay. Yes, way in back.
Is the Horseshoe Lake still fed by that man-made channel?
I am pretty sure it is not, but I think it's mainly a lot of runoff from up in the hills. Dave, do you know the answer to that?
I really don't, but I think I would agree with you that lava cap out there just won't permeate the water, and water cools up in that little depression there and stays.
There's a lot of work building that.
Yeah, oh, it was.
I guess it didn't seem like over the centuries it would have filled up with water anyway.
Yeah. Well, I remember Wes telling me about some problems with the channel leading to the lake. There were all sorts of things. I'd have to go back and glance at what he said in the book, but it's in there. But I think it was pretty inadequate. Dave?
Yeah, I think that's right. The canal system proved to be, over time, really a problem instead of a real functioning setup. But the thing I remember that brought an end to water in the canal was that a dam was built across the creek there right above Bear Hole. And if any of you have been to that dam site, you'll notice that both the shoulders of the dam on both sides of the creek have these slots built into the shoulders where the city would simply put big boards down those slots and dam up the creek by putting the boards across the creek, and that would funnel the water into the canal. Well, I remember as being a young boy, I think I was about 12 or 13 when one day I picked up the Enterprise record there at my parents' house. I was just getting into Upper Park, and there, the front page headline had a big picture, boy dies in Upper Bidwell Park. And what had happened was high spring flows down the creek had trapped a swimmer behind the dam, and he couldn't get himself off of that water pressure and out, and he was killed there. And so that really brought an end to putting the boards down those slots, damming the creek up with those boards, and funneling water down Horseshoe Lake. And I think Paul touched on it. The golf course turned to pumping water directly out of the creek. They didn't need Horseshoe Lake anymore. There hadn't been electricity out of the golf course. You couldn't run electric pumps, but now there was, and you could pump directly out of the creek, which was a big issue in itself.
Okay. Yes.
If you want to see the friendly side of Chico, you should walk in the park, because you'll see mothers pushing baby buggies, bicycles, and everybody waves to everybody. And people with their dog, you let you pet the dog. I mean, it's just a friendly part of Chico, and I think a lot of people are missing it.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. I think it needs to get the attention that it used to have. And I'll throw this out. I wanted to mention this. Back in 2005 was the park's 100th birthday, and it was a huge community celebration with music and workshops and showings of Robin Hood and a reenactment of the ceremony with where Annie gave the deed to the city. We're coming up on the 220th anniversary. Also, the 225th might work better, but maybe there should be another celebration. Yes?
You didn't mention the polar bear swim. I haven't done it, but
Yeah. Oh, there. I could have spent a whole lot more time on this. There's all kinds of things. Like I'm saying, this is an overview, and I'm hoping it can lead to some more discussion. Yes. Okay. Well, all right. Well.
I was just going to comment that I moved here a little over 2 years ago. When I started walking through the park, I would see the tent people alongside the creek, and I thought how ecologically damaging that was for the creek. And I'm glad they cleaned it up, and I hope that they will always get them out of there and push them to wherever they're at now, or just at least away from the park.
That's another huge issue. And along the same lines, we thought about that and decided it was...
What is the issue?
encampments in the park. And we discussed that and decided that we really couldn't do it justice in this particular book. It's just it needs its own book. But I do put in some basic facts, and then there's also an appendix about that with different articles and websites and other information about the whole homeless issue, and very, very big contentious issue which needs its own book. Okay, yes.
so I walk in Moore Park, and one of the things I've noticed as I walk along the trails is that all the trees of any size have these numbered little rings, and there's a number somewhere has cataloged all of the species and perhaps even the sizes or estimated ages. But one of the things I notice is all of the massive, huge valley oaks are falling, and I don't see where there's enough younger valley oaks replacing them. Have you run any discussion or concern about climate change affecting the balance of nature in the park?
Yeah, climate change is an issue, and that's one of the reasons for the prescribed burns, trying to remove invasive plants and prevent fires. And yeah, with the valley oaks, there was a time when there was a lot of concern about foot traffic in Lower Park impacting on the routes. And I'm not sure if what we're seeing now is a direct result of that, or if climate change or something else. But yeah, people have been watching the oaks down there for quite a while.
Can you explain when Sycamore Creek came along and its connection to Big Chico Creek?
Sycamore Creek? Actually, I'm sorry, I can't. Maybe someone else can. What's the connection of Sycamore Creek to Big Chico Creek?
Well, there is no real direct connection there naturally, but of course, the 1965 flood control project in BIDWELL Park, putting a dam across Big Chico Creek at the 5 Mile, and then another diversion on Ringo Channel, and then the building of the new channel that took Big Chico Creek water over to Sycamore and Mud Creek, where you could funnel high flows around Chico. And I remember the discussion at the time that in order to develop parts of East Chico, it was necessary to really get this flood control to make these new developments acceptable through the planning process. So that flood control project was an Army Corps of Engineers project, and it really simply takes high flow around Chico, then into Mud Creek, and then back into Big Chico Creek, a few miles short of the Sacramento River.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. Yes.
Just a little sideline. I worked for an architect here in town who was, his predecessor was the one that designed and has built the concession stands for 1 mile and 5 Mile. When they went out of business, he was just chucking all the drawings, and I know I saw the drawings for those. I don't know where they ended up, but
Yeah.
I
You know, here's another interesting fact I'll throw out. At one time, there was a proposal for there to be amusement park rides at 1 mile. And this was like the 50s, and the commission was very open to it. They thought it would increase kids' enjoyment of the park, but for whatever reason, it never happened. Whew. Okay. Any other thoughts? Well, thank you for coming. Oh.